Okay, getting a little used to. This is a slightly newer area than we've seen otherwise. It has a touch screen on it, which means there's going to be all kind of problems if things start screwing up. It looks like I can probably access it through the normal menu matters. What are we looking at? Well, it's Dixie. Why the hell did I get this? Yeah, good question. It's an old S&T game, SPI game. I don't think it came out on an S&T. It's written by Redmond Simmons, and I forgot to look up what else he actually designed. He's their graphic designer in general for SPI. And I know he's done some things that I remember liking a lot. Like, I think he was involved in the design more than just the graphics of Empires of the Middle Ages and some of the fantasy stuff. That he had some really interesting ideas. And this game, too, brings some interesting ideas here. It looks a little dark in this camera. I don't know. I don't really have a chance to figure it out. My normal one just automatically set, but this is, again, a used camera. Maybe somebody played with it and got settings, not in the default package settings. I'm getting things a little too dark. So let's talk about the why. I picked this up early on in my readmittance to gaming. Basically, when I started becoming really active on BGG again, and started picking up games after seeing a couple of Euros and stuff that I liked. It was cheap. That's my biggest argument in favor of it, because I had heard bad things about it. But it is intriguing, actually. So let's take a look at it. First of all, concept-wise, the idea is that the Confederates essentially win the American Civil War, are able to get their freedom, and then this postulates some interwar, pretty much 1930s era conflicts between the United States and the CSA. Exciting, right? And there's several scenarios. I don't know if we'll play all of them. What concepts are big here? It's kind of hard to say. It's got an action point system where you spend kind of like, the same kind of problems the CDGs are trying to handle and a number of other designs. You spend your resources on reinforcing, on recovering units, and on moving and fighting. And, what you spend is what you're allowed to do. So there's a limitation. You're not moving all your pieces and attacking with all your pieces. This is a fairly early game, 1976, not in the golden era, but in that period where SPI is starting to really experiment with some kind of funky stuff, much of which goes on to become, the Victory Games explorations, and some of it becomes kind of canon for, hey, these were really great ways to handle things. This one, maybe not so much, but we'll see. I guess the other big thing that it handles is this concept of breakdown units. You have divisional infantry units on the board. You also have armor, of course, because, that's the point behind it. And one other type of unit is forts. Got some forts. It's a free setup game, which always causes me problems when I'm first facing a game. There's limitations on the setup, but not much, and I kind of use the core the core army designations, which serve no useful purpose in play, to help direct things. Now, this particular scenario, the U.S. is going to be the aggressor. Not all of them is that the case, so that's kind of an interesting factor. And there's some pieces, I'm going to put these aside, that are not used in this scenario. Other pieces are divided up, so like reinforcement pieces are kind of cheaper to get, I believe. Replacements are more expensive to pull out and put back on and put on the board. And then these are core units that you combine a couple of divisions to make a larger, more powerful unit, but slower. And you also have to use action points for that. Why do I not have an initiative marker? Probably because it's this. That may be in the wrong place. I gotta clip that. It's got corners, damn it. Okay, let's take a quick look at the rules, see what the game's about. Again, this is my first time playing, and I know it's an old game. But, you know, it was just sort of bought on a whim because of how cheap it was. Okay, so you got combat strength, movement allowance. Designation doesn't matter. Size kind of does. Need more space somehow. Oh, yep, that's supposed to be the initiative marker. Glad I didn't just throw that in my bag of unused counters, because it sure looks like, you know, the things that don't say anything. Okay. Sequence of play for each turn. So, whoever took the least losses in the last turn will get the initiative, and they decide who moves first in the upcoming turn. At the beginning of the game, initiative is set by the scenario. I think it's actually the US always goes first, but I'm not sure. Okay. You determine your APs, your action points, and that's these values here. Those are set per scenario. For the most part, they're a fixed value, but as you lose cities, you lose action points and things that you can do. So cutting the enemy's supply sources can reduce his impact, his ability to fight effectively. Replacements and reinforcements, you're allowed to basically buy replacements and reinforcements. They have different costs, and put them on the board there. Unit breakdown. If you have any core on the board, you can spend some action points to split them into 2 divisions. And again, designation doesn't matter. Movement, you spend points, action points, in order to activate units, and then they get their full movement allowance. Rail movement. You can also move units that didn't move by normal movement using rail movement. I don't remember much about rail movement. One thing is, it's entirely within your home country territory. So you can't use it, like, even to reinforce invasions and such, not directly. You can use it to move something from theater to theater, but it can't get you right up to the front. You're not repairing any rail lines in it. I don't know what the... Let's take a look at what the scale is. I saw it. Damn it. Usually they give an overall scale here. Give a unit size. There we go. Game turns are 15 days of real time, which, yeah, I mean, there's time to repair railroads to some extent, but you're not going to get very deep into the enemy territory in that kind of time, I don't think. Unit formation phase. If you have divisional-sized infantry units in the same hex, you have to pay action points to combine them. If you don't have the action points, you screwed up and you kill off some of your infantry. Disruption recovery. One of the results of combat is to disrupt units. This is kind of like in the Victory Games game. But here, and like in that game, not but, you spend action points to recover your disruptions. And then you're allowed to attack, and again, you have to spend action points to launch an attack. It's got a kind of funky table, which is a differential table, where you're rolling single 6-sided dice, but you spend action points to give yourself die roll bonuses. You also have to spend action points for each hex that's attacking. Then the second player gets a similar turn, and then you move the game turn marker forward and determine who has the initiative. And how far it is, I guess. I mean, this marker is moved as losses are calculated, so. Okay, what about admin points? Like I said, you get a certain amount per turn, and you expend them for various things, and they don't accumulate. At the beginning of your player turn, if at least 3 of your cities or your capital basically counts as 3 cities, are in enemy hands, actually occupied, your AP level is reduced by 3. Yeah, it's action points, not analysis paralysis. And then for each additional city above the first 3, it's reduced by 1. And you can recapture your cities. You get nothing for capturing enemy cities. You just reduce their capability to do stuff. Okay. Reinforcements and replacements. You can spend APs to organize and receive these. Where do they show up? When units are destroyed, they generally go in the replacement box. Costs 4 to get a division-size infantry unit. This is the only type of unit you can take as a reinforcement. Replacements, it's 2 for a division-size infantry, 4 for a brigade-size armor unit. And these are the only ones you can take there. Basically, if a corps gets destroyed, it's broken into its component 2 divisions and put in the replacements. Oh. They have to go in a phasing player's home country city, but if they're all occupied, you can receive them in any hex of your home country that's not enemy occupied or controlled. You have to place them, I believe you're allowed to stack 2 divisions in the same location, but that's the stacking rules more than anything else. You're not normally allowed to keep them in that way, which is to say once you hit the unit formation phase, which is before combat, you have to pay to combine things, but you have a chance to move things out of their hex so you don't have to pay that cost. So there's kind of an interesting thing, which is if the enemy holds all of your home country cities, you can raise up units everywhere. Of course, you're not going to have a lot of action points, and I wouldn't worry about that weird little edge case too much. If you've lost all your cities, you're in bad shape. You can still win, as we shall see with this scenario. They can move on the turn that they're created as long as you pay for them. This is on the board, including in these boxes, the total, well, not in the core box, the total number of divisions and battalions that you have on the game. Infantry breakdown and formation. Okay, during the breakdown and formation phase, this is actually pretty simple. During the breakdown phase, you can take a corps and you spend the action points. I'm looking for the cost here. It's 3 APs to break down, or formation. Yeah, it's 3 APs either way. You can break a corps into 2 component divisions, which will be actually sitting over here in the corps organization box. As you start replacing core. For forming, it's also 3 action points, but you don't want to stack your units without having those action points. If you do, you're going to lose a unit. Armored brigades and formations can never form into corps. They are simply loose units, which can be used within the stacking directions. Movement. What's funky about movement? Well, first thing is you have to pay action points to activate their movement allowance. It's 1 action point per division or brigade, and 3 action points for a corps, which works out because the corps are 3 strength points, right? You have to pay the action points for each unit that you want to move. I don't believe you're allowed to move in stacks. It's not a big deal. You can't move through enemy strength points. There's no overrun or anything like this. No limitation otherwise what can move through a hex. You must stop on entering an enemy-controlled hex and move no further that phase. Infantry cannot move directly from one enemy zone of control to another, but armored units are allowed to move through one enemy zone, and they have to stop on the second one. Rail movement. There's a specific expenditure. It's 2 points for a division or brigade size unit to move by rail. And I believe you can move infinitely as long as you do not move adjacent to an enemy infantry or armored unit, or start adjacent to one. And you may move when you're disrupted by rail, right? No. Disrupted units still prevent rail movement if they're adjacent to a location. Okay, stacking. So at the end of unit formation, you have a stacking limitation that's put in play. And remember, that's before combat. 1 infantry corps plus 1 armored brigade, or an infantry division plus an armored brigade, or 2 armored brigades. Anything else is illegal, and you will be destroyed. Fortifications and cities don't affect stacking limitations of infantry and armor. There is some terrain effects on stacking, though, which we'll get to in a little bit. We probably should right after this. If you're legally stacked, you're fine. If you're not, you're screwed. Infantry divisions have to stack together to form into corps and then pay the action points during the formation phase. An undisrupted unit stacked with another armored unit or an infantry division or corps has a zone of control. We'll get to that in a moment. Friendly cities and fortifications don't affect stacking. And then some examples. Okay. What about terrain effects? Well, clear hexes are 1 movement point each. Rough and swamp cost 2 movement points to move through, and armor's not allowed to stack with other units. Forts aren't allowed in there. And that's going to create a defensive advantage, which is basically there's two rows of columns. This is kind of like Desert Fox done early, right? There's 2 different combat tables, but they're both differential combat tables that are based on whether or not there's an advantageous terrain. Cities, well, homeland cities count as normal, but they have a 1-point defensive strength until they're occupied, captured by an enemy. And you can only occupy them by combat. Captured cities, once they've been occupied, have no defensive strength until you leave them unoccupied, in which case they recover it. Resource hexes, the little oil rigs, which all are in the Confederacy, in their Texas oil, and maybe the goal of this scenario. Don't count as anything special except victory conditions. Ordinary rivers. So there's 2 kinds of rivers. There's major rivers, which have this kind of hashing on them, and then ordinary rivers. Ordinary rivers don't cost you anything extra, but if you attack only through those hexes, it gives a defensive advantage combat chart, and zones of controls don't extend through. Ordinary river hex sides in enemy territory costs 2 additional movement points to cross. You gotta get together boats or ford them or something. The Great River can only be crossed at bridges, and I assume that's working bridges. There's rules for destroying bridges. And you can only attack using river assault tactics, which does not limit you to the bridge. So you can actually create a beachhead across a river where there's no bridge, for whatever that's worth. Blocked all sea and lake are prohibited, with no zones of control, no combat going across them. Since I'm using this wonderful camera, I'm going to pause, because there's no harm now. I may have helped the lighting a little bit, I'm not sure. Still looks gray to me. Very, very dark. I also set the time, which it seems to insist on every time I charge it. Well, we'll see. So where are we? We talked about breaking down forming. Armored brigades and formations aren't formed. Movement, yeah. Okay. We were over here. Zones of control. Okay. Certain units exert a zone of control, which is the 6 hexes directly adjacent. A unit or stack with 2 or more undisrupted combat strength points exerts a zone of control, but fortifications don't count. My setup here is not great, but there wasn't much I could do about it. I've got a couple of zones here with the fortifications don't count. A couple of zones here with the armored units and another zone there, but for the most part, I do not, and actually I'm not sure because forts do something weird. Okay. Disrupted units never exert a zone of control, nor does their combat strength contribute to a stack for it. Cities and fortifications don't contribute, although they do negate the zones of controls of friendly units stacked in them, which leads me to believe that these units in the fort don't actually have a zone of control. We'll see. I hope I don't lose the game on the first turn just because the Union can come in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Say yeah, they can't. They need to get 5 of those resource areas to win the game. That's one of their victory conditions. And it would really suck if I could just take it right away. Zones of control do not extend through river hex sides. Zones of control never extend through blocked hex sides or through sea and lake. Now, this is sort of a throwaway, this little thing about, although they do negate the zones of control of friendly units stacked in them. I don't think that's mentioned anywhere else. There may be some errata, because again, I've heard that this is kind of considered a problematic game. When infantry enters a hex to which there's an effective zone of control, it must stop. When armored units enter the second zone of control, they have to stop. There's no requirement to attack things because of zones of control. They don't interfere with each other. Somewhere I have the rules, yeah. An infantry unit which begins its movement in an enemy zone of control may leave that hex as long as it enters something that's not an enemy-controlled hex. An armored unit can start in an enemy zone of control and move to another zone of control, but then it stops for the turn. Okay. Disruption recovery. You pay APs to recover disruption. This is done on a per hex basis. It costs 1 AP per friendly strength point being undisrupted in the hex. Now, it's a little weird there. I'm not sure you have to do every unit in the hex. Yeah, it's done by the unit. Okay. Combat. Combat is done by adjacent opposing units at the phasing player's discretion. The phasing player is the attacker. You total the combat strength of all the units in the attack and compare it to the total combat strengths of the units that are the object of the attack, and you get a differential and base it on the terrain. And that'll give you the base chart that you're looking the base column that you're looking at. Okay, but remember, you have to pay for this. In a multi-hex attack, the attacking units occupy more than 1 hex. The phasing player must allocate 1 action point per additional attacking a hex. Now, there's 2 places you can pay. One is if you want more than 1 hex involved in the attack, and the other is if you want to modify the ensuing die roll. 1 AP. Let me see. It's not listed there. You can allocate from 1 to 6 AP to as the die roll modifier, and that'll be a +1 through +6. What's weird about that is that's multiplied. So if you attack from 3 different hexes, not only do you have to pay 2 AP for the extra hexes, but every modifier to the die roll you have to pay 3 AP for, because there's 3 hexes involved. Yep. You roll the die, you add whatever your die roll modifier that you bought is, and you get a combat result, which is read as effects on the attacker, effects on the defender. You have options with those effects. Okay, all your units can attack any and all enemy occupied hexes to which they're adjacent. Only those units directly adjacent can attack. It's completely voluntary. You can attack by as many hexes as you like, but you're only allowed to attack each enemy hex once per turn. And each of your units may only attack once per turn. You can't voluntarily reduce the differential, but you can hold units out of the battle, which has the essential same effect pretty much. And I don't know why you'd want to. Terrain. Affecting terrain, including rivers, just determines that you're on this worst column or worst set of columns. Forts and cities. Okay, forts have a combat strength of 2 strength points, and that's written on them there. But it's only for defense. Cities have a combat strength of 1 point in defense. And I think that may only be homeland cities. Units that attack a hex which contains an enemy fortification or city must always suffer their losses first in combat, which is an interesting concept we'll see. When a hex contains a fort or a city is attacked, the fort or city adds its strength points. If there are no friendly strength points, it defends with its intrinsic defense strength. When a city is captured by an enemy force, it no longer has an intrinsic strength point to add to the defenses. Only homeland cities defend for their own side. All units involved in an attack against a hex containing a city or fort must satisfy their loss points first. This is true even if you're trying to recapture one of your own cities. Whenever an unoccupied city or fort is attacked, the attacking player must fulfill 2 conditions in order to occupy the city. He must inflict at least 1 loss strength point on the city or fort. Remember, the fort has 2 strength points for combat, but it only has 1 loss point, even though they have a defensive combat strength of 2. And he must have at least 1 surviving undisrupted unit available to advance into the city and occupy it. And if you fail to occupy the city, it's fine again. Or fort. A fort, whether occupied or unoccupied, can only be destroyed by advancing into it. An enemy city can only be occupied as a result of advance after combat. Whenever an occupied city or fort is attacked and the occupying units are driven off or eliminated, the city is captured or the fort is destroyed if the attacker can advance into it. No, not just can, but does. For each specific attack, you total the strength. Yeah, we talked about all this already. You can't go lower than the lowest differential for your type of terrain. You're just not allowed to make the attack. You roll a die, adjust the die roll number by the number of APs expended, and you get a result. Here they talk about the APs again. And randomizer chits for the folio version of the game. Okay, loss points. The attacker can take his losses. Well, first of all, you have to determine who takes their losses first. Now, if you're attacking a fort or a city, you automatically take losses first. But otherwise, if your losses are greater than the defender's loss points, you have to take losses first. If the defender his loss points is greater than or equal to the attacker's loss points, and there's no fort involved, then the defender takes his losses first. The attacker has 2 ways to take losses. He can destroy divisions or brigades or division equivalents is how it should be worded. The attacking player's option, the first loss point, can also be satisfied by the disruption of all attacking units. The remainder, if any, must be taken with destruction of divisions or brigades equal to the balance of the result. Defending units, not in forts or cities, has 3 options. The loss points can be taken with destructions. The defender can take their first loss point by retreating all their defending units 1 hex within the balance, with the balance of the loss being satisfied with destruction. The last option is you retreat all defending units 1 hexes above and disrupt them all, and that'll take 2 loss points. You can't stand and disrupt. Defending units in fortified cities, the units occupying the hex of the fortified city must suffer losses in terms of destruction of divisions or brigades equal to the result. If the hex contains a fort or city is entirely vacated, of armor and infantry due to combat losses while defending, and there are undisrupted attacking units, then 1 attacking unit is allowed to advance into the fort or city that will capture it. When attacking units enter into a hex containing a fort, the fort's gone. If it's a city, they have now occupied. When you choose to satisfy losses with destruction of units, each division or brigade is worth 1 loss point. Each infantry corps is worth 2, but it's broken down for free to take those losses. If you choose to take a we haven't hit this. I'm trying to see if it's somewhere. So when you lose a corps, both units in the when you lose a unit off a corps, it's broken into 2 units. 1 is put in the replacements box so that you can rebuild it. 1 is left on the map, but it's flipped over to indicate that it's disrupted. And that's how you mark disruptions, if I haven't told you before, which I'm pretty sure I haven't. Okay. If you take a disruption of all your units, you flip all your units over. And that's always the first 1 or 2 loss points, depending on which side. Disrupted units are not allowed to move, attack, or contribute their combat strength for creation of a zone of control. Disrupted corps may not voluntarily break down into divisions. 2 disrupted divisions may not form a corps. When a disrupted unit or stack containing a is attacked, the attacking player gets 2 additional pips on his die roll, in addition to any AP expenditure. So you could actually have a +8 on the die roll, if you so desired. You recover from disruption by paying over here. And that happens, I don't know when in the turn. Just before combat. Which is important because if you were disrupted, you're not allowed to move. If you just fought and you're disrupted. So it really can slow you down. Okay. Where are we? Retreat and advance as a result of combat. Only defending units can retreat in order to take loss points. When the defending player elects to retreat, he's moved 1 hex away from the original position. That counts as 1 loss point, no matter how many units retreat. You cannot retreat through prohibited terrain. You cannot retreat into an enemy-controlled or enemy-occupied hex. You may not retreat in violation of stacking. If the only path of retreat is one of those described above, you're not allowed to take a point for retreat. If you must retreat into a vacant hex if possible. If it's not, you go into the hex with the fewest number of friendly units which are not adjacent to enemy units. If you're forced to retreat into a hex containing friendly units which are about to be attacked, but those enemy units are not exerting a zone of control because you're not allowed to retreat into a controlled hex, the retreating units are totally ignored for the attack. If the attacker advances into the hex, the retreating units will be destroyed. If as a result of combat, a player should find himself with 2 disrupted infantry divisions in the same hex, I believe one of them is retreated. You're not destroyed by this. The core is, no. So here they say if one of the divisions forming into a core is disrupted, the core is in a disrupted state when formed. At another point they said you couldn't create a core out of disrupted divisions. I don't care. I know there's errata for this thing. I really don't care. I would say you can't organized disrupted units. Here they say at least one of the infantry divisions must be in an undisrupted state. So I would say that that is more specific. Somewhere or another, 7.22. If both the infantry divisions are in a disrupted state, the corps cannot be formed. Instead, one of the divisions is retreated a hex. So that's the case if you get stuck in that position somehow due to retreats as well. Oh, where are we? Advance. If the attacking player has participating undisrupted units available after satisfying losses, he can advance only one of those units into the defending hex. If the hex attacked is an unoccupied city or fort, the attacker must inflict one loss point on the city in order to advance into it. If the hex is an occupied city or fort and the occupying units are retreated, okay, that was not an option earlier, but again, I would say that's more specific, so I'm going to allow it. And that was specifically disallowed, though, before, but it seemed more of a throw-off. The attacker may automatically advance one of his undisrupted units into the hex and occupy the city. If the attacker fails to do this, the city remains in enemy hands. Okay, we're going to pause again because I'm getting dry mouth and need to swap out batteries. Good to have my old kind of camera in hand, but there are some differences. Like the zoom doesn't work as well as it did on my last one. i.e. it resets, maybe because I'm bumping it. That was a problem I had with others. The initiative phase. You keep track of initiative points as you take losses. Whoever took the greatest number of losses over the course of a turn, well, will lose the initiative. You move it in the direction, I guess, of who gets the initiative, whatever. Doesn't really matter. Now this is loss points, not units damaged or anything like that. It's just how many points the combat result table tells you. As soon as initiative is determined, it's reset to 0 for the next turn, and one player decides to the other what's going to happen. Rivers and bridges. Okay, we have already kind of touched on these, but there's a little bit of specifics here. Ordinary rivers can be crossed in your home country for no extra cost. In an enemy home country, they cost 2 extra movement points. If they're on the border, they're considered controlled by the US player. Great rivers can only be crossed at bridge tack sides or as a result of combat. To cross bridge tack sides in the enemy player's home, and you don't create a bridgehead either, so it may not be a great idea. To cross bridge tack sides in an enemy player's home country, you must capture it. Only armored units can capture bridges. To capture a bridge, you must cease movement and expend 3 movement points in a hex with one of the hex sides of the bridge. You roll a die. On a 1 or 2, you capture the bridge. Otherwise, the bridge is destroyed. Only armored units can capture bridges. Bridges can be used to allow units to cross great rivers during the movement phase in which they're captured, i.e. you can make that roll to capture it and then throw units across the bridge. But the armored unit has been stopped as far as I can see. And all subsequent movement phases in which they remain captured. Units, and I'm going to have 2 markers for bridges. One for the bridge has been captured and one for it's been destroyed. And I'll find something, probably tiddlywinks for captured. Units pay no additional movement points to cross great rivers at bridged hex sides, captured or otherwise. Once a bridge is captured, it's under control of the captured player. The enemy player can only use the bridge if he recaptures it, using the same mechanism. Now, that mechanism could cut enemy units on the wrong side of the bridge, and all kind of weird stuff can happen, which I'm kind of fantasizing about, but think sounds scary. Like, unbelievable. Attacks across great rivers made at intact bridge hex sides are treated as an attack across an ordinary river. A player need not control a bridge hex side in order to attack across it. Now remember, the ordinary river, it's just a terrain modifier. Rivers and retreats. You cannot retreat across an unbridged river hex side of any type. If you're forced to retreat across a river hex side, you're eliminated instead. You can only retreat across a bridge hex side if you control the bridge. If the bridge is destroyed, I assume nobody can ever control it again. There's Amphibious Assaults, which are attacks across great rivers at unbridged hex sides. Those are going to cost 6 APs per hex side attacked across. Okay, and that in addition to any other costs you send. And then the scenarios there's 4 scenarios in the game. The first one we're going to play is this War for Hemisphere Security, where the USA is trying to grab either resources or cities. Others, the CSA wants to take 6 US cities with some specific, in both cases there's specific cities that you have to take at least one of. The War for Access and Free Labor, the U.S. Doesn't like the river tariffs and must occupy New Orleans or clear everything west of the Mississippi in order to win. So 3 little scenarios. We have a little chart of the action point costs, the terrain effects chart, and then the combat chart. There's some weird shit in here. The combat chart is very different from anything else that I've seen. And the action point is kind of a new thing. I don't know if it's brand new in this game, but I can't think of anything that had it beforehand offhand. The armored rules, sort of the sticky kind of zone of control for armor that's a little different from how other games that I'm aware of in this era were handling it. I'm going to take a quick peek to see what else Simonson designed and come back, since I took breaks anyway. A definitely interesting set. Empires of the Middle Ages he's listed as design credits for, which is what I thought. Sorcerer, which was a weird game. Dragon Slayer, the Avalon Hill game. Just a whole bunch of them. Now I'm getting a weird reddishness to this camera. I don't know how to play with the coloring on these things. I'm used to just point and click with the Averias. I don't know. But anyway, most of the games that he designed, well, I don't know if most. A lot of the games that he designed have some really funky shit going on. The ones that I recognize offhand, Battlefleet Mars, a game, oh man, I gotta get that played. I don't really enjoy it, but the idea of it is just so brilliant. Where you have the planets circling the sun, as they should, but that's part of the game. They're like slowly moving as to where they are. Now it's all done on a hex map, which is just weird. It doesn't work, but in some ways it works better for me than games like High Frontier do. Anyway, yeah, he has designed, you know, a couple dozen games that the ones that I recognize are often ones with some very intriguing little mechanisms in them. A lot of science fiction, a couple fantasy, but also, you know, a decent number of historical ones. All right, I just wanted to get that in because I wanted to look at what, you know, how big his portfolio of designs was. Because I know he's mainly the graphic designer for these games. For just about everything SBI did. And so it's kind of weird to see that. I see some that I know were not hits. And this one I also know is not a hit. All right, let's send this up.